I want to run some numbers by y'all. The most fun Honda you can buy brand new is only 22 grand. A V8 manual American muscle car is only 25,000 bucks. A Corvette with the most powerful engine ever to fit the platform for a measly $30,000. No, that's not me having a stroke. That's the price adjusted for inflation. A CRX SI was only 10 grand in 1989. Same with the Camaro Z28 in 85, which is the fastest one. And a Corvette, when they finally put a V8 in it, was only $3,000. You can't even get a Miata today for the price of a fully loaded, top-of-the-line sports car in the 1950s. Adjusted for inflation, of course. So, what gives? We have a whole channel dedicated to telling people about the cheap used cars that are fun, luxurious, or will at least turn a few heads. But in the olden days, it was totally normal for anyone with a part-time job to be able to pick up a new car that was fun. And even if you weren't French fry cook rich, throughout history, cars were way more affordable. Yeah, even way back in the beginning. Sure, when people like Ferdinand Porsche were making the very first electric hybrids, cars were an absolute luxury. But when the Model T first rolled off the assembly line, it cost an earth-shattering $825. That's 18 grand in today's money. So it's not cheap, but normal people could buy one. And by the time the production line was in its stride, a Model T could be had for $360. And in 1924, when the Model T sold nearly 2 million units, it was only $265, or the equivalent of about 4,000 bucks. I mean, just think about that. You do about 3 months of work and you could go buy a brand spanking new car. Nowadays, the cheapest car on the market is the Chevrolet Spark LS, and the average new car costs $47,000. Yeah. It sucks. Buying a new Camry from the 90s is way better in every way than that Chevy Spark. But that Chevy Spark costs $15,000 today. And yes, it is the cheapest new car out there, but that's 3 times more than what a new Model T was. And here's the thing, cars stayed relatively cheap until the mid-90s. And that's when cheap cars started getting less cheap. An NA Miata came out at 12 grand. And it was praised for its affordability. And that's like $25,000 in today's money, which is pretty much what a new Miata is worth. Things are still pretty good for us cheapskates though. And you know what else was about the same price? Nearly 50% of all new cars. The average price of a new car in the 90s was 15 grand, or 30,000 bucks in today's money. The amount of money would get you into a Camaro, or a V8 Mustang, or a legendary 240SX. There were all sorts of cheap, fun cars, and that continued into the early 2000s with the rise of tuner culture. So, get this. Cars were getting smaller, cheaper, and easier to buy parts for. And that meant everyone could take a computer and make their car fast. If you went to a meet in the late 90s, you'd be awash in cheap cars that were fun to drive, Eclipses, Civic EXs, Integras, and all the other cars that were used in the first Fast and Furious. Since, well, you know, the cars featured in the first movie were just local groups showing up. And then, when Need for Speed was urging that this is what people wanted, cheap cars started disappearing. The Integra, or RSX, canceled. The price of a Mustang V8 crept up to $36,000. Then the Eclipse was gone. The Civic Si, former champion of the cheap, fun car class, hit 30 grand adjusted. By 2010, the price of a new car averaged 30 grand, which is $39,000 in today's money. This is why a lot of you stare at Squid like an alien when he talks about all the cheap cars that he's owned. And if our data is right, most of you were first able to buy a car when a cheap car was 30 grand. And that's still a really tough pill to swallow. But 25 years ago, a cheap car was only the equivalent of 20 grand. And it was very easy to get a well-sorted used car for 5 grand. And I'm sorry, but those of you that aren't ready to buy a car yet, you are screwed.
You're screwed. Thank you. Bye.
Because this year, I bet the average price of a new car will be north of $50,000. Over $10,000 more than it was just 10 years ago, and over $20,000 more than it was 20 years ago. That is insane, and I'm sorry, but you can still be an enthusiast by subscribing to Ideal Cars if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell. Because, well, there's 2 things. Both of them are really kind of sad. And the first is really easy to understand. People just aren't buying the cars that they used to. Times have changed, and the people who buy new cars are into things like, safety, comfort, gadgets, and that stuff costs money. A super cheap car in the early 90s didn't even have airbags. Now even that dumb little Spark is hundreds of times safer, has an okay stereo, and can travel at highway speeds no sweat. It costs more, but it's hard to imagine that anyone would ever consider buying a car that is as crappy as a Ford Pinto nowadays, especially when people won't even buy a Spark since it sucks so much. And the second and much more relevant reason to our enthusiast interests is, well, it's more complicated and much more upsetting. And it has to do with wage stagnation. You see, in 1925, when the Model T was selling like hotcakes, it was only $250 a pop. The average person made $37 per week, which is around $3,200 a year. Adjusted for our friend inflation, that's $42,000-ish per year. Pretty reasonable. It means that your car was like 8% of your income. Nice, you can definitely swallow that. But then zoom forward to 1955, when the Corvette first got a V8. You are an average American who wants an average car that costs $2,000. As an average American, you make $4.5 grand a year. So a new car will set you back 44% of your income. If you want, you totally could afford that new Corvette, but you'd have to save for a few more months and you would be fine. Now, it's 1995. The internet is new and no one knows how badly it will screw up society. And a brand new car averages 18 grand. The average income is 33 grand a year. So really, nothing has changed since the 50s. A new car in 1995 would set you back about half a year's wages, or, well, 50%. Still, really doable, right? A 5-year loan would mean you're paying 10% of your income a year, leaving you a majority of your income for rent, food, and arcade games. Now, let's step into the 2000s. Average income is 32 grand, which is actually a little lower than in 1995. But now cars cost 29,000 bucks. Cars, as it turns out, continued to grow in the price with normal inflations, while wages did not. In 2005, the average new car was, holy hell, 90% of the average income. Now we are all fucked. The average income here in the year of our Lord 2022 in the United States is, Jesus guys, it's still only 32 grand. We are not a political channel, but guys, this is wrong. The system is kind of broken, especially because that means that the average person simply cannot afford a new car. You, me, Squid, Trav, a new car averages over $47,000. That's more than a year's worth of income. Even the cheapest cars on the market are 60% of the average person's income. But no one can even afford those because rent has also increased way faster than wages. And that brings us to the crux of the issue. No one can afford new cars, not even the cheap ones. So manufacturers won't make them. So let's pretend that you are Ford. Everyone wants a cheap, fun car like the Focus ST, right? But most of the people who want a cheap car can only afford like 25 grand max. So you build a fast hatchback. And in 2013, the Focus ST hits the market at just under $25,000. Nice, except it doesn't sell all that great. And the lower price means that you don't make very much when you do sell one. Meanwhile, Jeff business owner doesn't blink when buying a $60,000 F-250. In fact, you're Ford, so you artificially inflate the price to 70 grand, and they still fly off the lot. Why would you be building a Focus ST anymore? Why even try to build a cheap car like a Chevy Spark when the average person still can't really afford to buy one? And when people that can afford to buy a new car are sure as hell not buying a Chevy Spark. In fact, since people with money want EVs, why make internal combustion cars at all? Are you depressed? I'm freaking depressed. So, what can we do? First of all, this hurts me to say, but if you can, consider buying a new car. But only if you have the income and you can afford the monthly payments. We have to vote with our wallets if we want them to keep building them. The only way brands like Subaru are going to continue to make the WRX is if people are buying them. The BRZ/86 sells pretty well, and the BMW Supra, as much as we like to make fun of it, sells pretty well as well. Those are all at different price points, with the 86 being the most affordable, but they are also more than most people can comfortably buy. So let's face it, one or two people demanding that Dodge bring back a cheap V8 car like the Dart isn't going to make much of a difference. Plus, on average, the same new vehicle with a manual transmission costs about $1,000 less, which helped keep cars cheap when they were cheap. But take a look at this graph of CarMax car sales from 1995 to 2020, and you'll see that in the 25 years, it's gone from over 25% of all sales were manual to less than 4%. Also, if you look at the most popular features on new cars, it's easy to see why prices have ballooned. Bluetooth, rear view cameras, and heated seats are in over 50% of all new cars. And the manual transmission, if you go down all the way to the bottom, is the lowest bought feature at just 2.5%. And those top features are expensive. But even bigger picture, there has been this underlying shift for decades in the way that we view owning versus renting and how we experience things. Yes, the world used to be small. What I mean is that before the internet, your car equaled freedom. You could hit the open road and experience new things the further that you went. You wanted to own that vehicle so that you could go out and buy groceries, go on dates with new girls, go to work and school, and experience new places. Now, with the internet though, if you want to use a car, well, get chauffeured in an Uber, or hit up Turo and drive a different car every day of the week. Want to go on a date? Fire up Tinder or Bumble. That's how I found YouTube Girlfriend. Not cruising the strip in my cool rented ride. And if I need to go to work, well, I walk 10 feet to my desk because me and a whole lot of people now work remote. And if I want to experience new things, well, I live vicariously through the millions of creators on TikTok. It's just too easy to visit the Grand Canyon, drive a fast car on the ring, and bungee jump all without leaving the couch. Now, let's pull up that graph again on sales for manual transmissions. In 1995, the internet was still a thing that was kind of hard to explain to people what it actually was. Then, as it became a place everyone could experience anything, more and more people used the internet to do just that. So there was less reason year after year to physically experience a manual transmission when you could virtually experience a seasoned pro rip the ring in a manual training car virtually online. I'm willing to bet for most of you, the internet was your gateway into cars. If it was, hit the like button. And I bet it was the main reason that you became an enthusiast at all. I'm cautiously optimistic that this channel, Ideal Cars, has something to do with that. But manufacturers have lost touch with what makes a cheap car fun, because we are the minority when it comes to sales. And that isn't what sells the best. So we enthusiasts don't win. And that's why when companies like Nissan make the new Nissan Z, or Mazda makes the Miata, or Subaru still continues making the BRZ, we need to buy those stripper models with a manual transmission. No extras, no nothing. Yes, 30 to 40K isn't cheap, but in our new reality, that's as good as you can do. And so, on that bombshell, I've been Brad Danger. This is Ideal Cars. Subscribe, turn on that notification bell, go snag some swag, and become part of the Ideal fam. Promise me one thing, keep living the ideal lifestyle.